Welcome back to the With Joe Evie podcast. We're continuing this discussion of Alan Watts' big ideas about learning, education, and life. Alan Watts says in one of his talks that the reward for studying French should be French speaking and participation with French people and in French culture, right, Luke? But he says it doesn't really become that very often with our universities. And keep in mind, this was back he died in 1973. So this is before internet era and everything like that. Just keep this in mind. And he says the point of so much of the university culture and the faculty mentality within it is to study for the sake of studying. Because the studying so often becomes the point itself, not applying it to something. This is not his words. I don't want to put anything like this in his mouth, but to me, it's almost like the word is like masturbation. and respect to all academics. Some are good, some are like practical and like to implement things, but a lot of say academia that I've seen is masturbation for sure. Absolutely. And he has this quote, it just struck me for this episode: faculty people cultivate a studied mediocrity. He makes the example that when you're like, he was a philosopher, right? And he goes, so often when you get to these big end of your, like high up in this career or whatever you're doing, the reward is, everything's gated, he's talking about. And you come back to that stage-based idea. You got the next outcome. And he goes, they have this kind of convention or whatever it is, not convention actually, but society or something. When you're a philosopher, you come to this thing. And he goes, you talk about everything except philosophy. You're just talking politics and stuff like that. And he makes the point around clergy and religions like that. When they're gathering the leaders, they're not talking about faith. They're not talking about getting back to the real message. They talk about politics. And I guess this is some of the patterns from the institutions, like the biggest institutions we have in society, like I guess politics, universities, religions. And so it's the circular nature of what goes on in all of these places. It's there to basically serve itself, he's saying. It doesn't really map onto what you'd expect the real world outcomes to be. The train tracks, if you will, don't seem to go from the colleges and the universities straight out into the world. They seem to just circle back. What I mean is that Peter Thiel says, one of the things he says, I don't think we covered it, but he basically says sometimes education is just a signaling mechanism. For example, how many times have you heard the phrase, so-and-so, Luke's very smart, he went to university, he's got a degree. Or so-and-so is very well educated, they had a series of degrees and whatever. And it's basically a game of intellectualism so often. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, you came off mute. I thought you had something.
No. I've heard it so many. I've heard that phrase countless times just from just recalling all of the times I've heard it, especially from my lovely mother.
Yeah, classic. Again, generational shift, right? It probably was a good rule of thumb in their time and for their generation. And so a lot of people might be sitting here thinking, yeah, people are studied, they're smart. And, fair enough if that's your belief. Like, I just don't consider it a guarantee. I actually don't think it's that useful a proxy, because a lot of it is about signaling it. And the celebration is that you are very studied, but nothing else, not what you did with it, not who you are in the world, just celebrating the fact that you were studied. I guess my mum didn't study, and she said some of the, I guess, guys back in the day, it's like, oh no, I'm not dating a girl who didn't go to university.
Jeez.
Yeah, brutal. I'm sure that's not the majority. But I think this is like, again, it feeds into some of these other thinkers we're talking about, Luke, right? So Taleb, again, the abstraction away from reality, the signaling mechanism. This is picked up by Watts here. Taleb and careerism, right? So that was Thiel with signaling. Taleb, it sounds like what Taleb was referring to as careerism, like the debasing of knowledge, because turning the debasing of knowledge into a competitive sport. which is quite a criticism. So Watts has an example, right, of a clothing store, because this is where it gets applicable, right? Here's the example of a clothing store. He says, if you set up a clothing store, you manufactured and sold clothes, that is something you could do that would be quite meaningful, because you could take a lot of pride in what you created. Making something wonderful that people enjoy wearing and they take pride in it, you would take pride in it. He goes, but if you set up a clothing store for the purpose of making money, then it's about the money, and you compromise the clothes for the money. And then even when you get the money as a result, it's not fulfilling to you. And you're locked in this pursuit just for that outcome. It's a very simple example of, it's not what you do, it's how you do it and why you do it. So no matter what you're doing, I think that is like the very interesting, way of like filtering the right and wrong reasons. In the last episode, you were asking me, how do we know if we are really living? And I guess it's hard to answer. We stumbled around a bit, but like you feel it. And it's things like this which make you feel it. Because when it's Steve Jobs is someone, I'd say, on a bigger scale, who I think seems to have applied this to what he did from afar, right? He wasn't so much, he was a good businessman, an entrepreneur, even though he was erratic. Like, he was very smart on what he did, but he was clearly like obsessed with products. Like, he would get everyone to sign the inside of a computer, like as a piece of art. He treated it like art. And he would fuss over like how pretty the chips were, or the microchips, or whatever, the compressors, whatever it was. And people were like, no one's ever going to see this. No one's going to know how it looks. And he goes, I'll know. And the quality of like what they worked on, even though I say that all my iPhones broke always, so I don't even buy Apple products anymore. But like conceptually, like the idea of making something simple that democratizes computer technology and what came after with iPhones for everyday people has a lot of empathy in it. And it can only come from people who care about what they do. Because even though, like, this in the biography on Jobs by Walter Isaacson, he makes contrast. Like, Jobs was not afraid to have shots at Apple, even though I think he had a very good relationship with Bill Gates. But he's not afraid to fire shots at them because they tried to do certain things that Apple did, like their version of the iPod, right, for music. Funny that that's now a extinct concept, basically. But like, they tried to do it, he goes, but they weren't about music. They didn't care about music. That's why it didn't work. To them, it was a business opportunity. And like, it didn't work. It flopped. So I think it's just like applying this. When I consolidate it, it's, if you value, the education or the things you learn, so it can signal something about you to others, it is focusing on status. And to me, status is normally not a good priority because it's very extrinsic. I'm not saying you can't enjoy status. I enjoy certain levels of status within groups of friends and stuff like that, for sure. But normally healthy if it's a small percentage of the joy, not the overarching goal. Again, it does lead you into this system of focusing on the wrong things thereafter. I think if you go down that path, which will probably compromise work, including income, ironically enough. And yeah, so, a very simple message for this one. And Luke, open to you if you have any comments, or you can pull up your Charlie Munger card. Nothing further to add. But focus on like utility and pride in what you do, because that'll bring you in touch with the reality and the reality of who you serve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've talked about this in the past, Joe, when, people get bright ideas about starting a business just for the sake of starting a business. And then obviously as they go into the pursuit, there's no substance behind it. And it's not gonna work.